Hopefully it's a lot better this time.
We have lost objective Charlie.
Well, let's see.
We are losing objective Butter.
You genuinely can't do much here. I mean, look at these.
We have lost objective Apples.
Just camping.
We have lost the sector.
Maybe I should camp up. Let's see. And of course, it's a sentry with a Villar bonus. I mean, literally anything else and I would have been fine. I think I'll just use my shotgun and hope for the best.
We are losing objective Apples. We have lost objective Apples.
What? That should have killed one of them. That's just straight up stupid. That should have killed one of them, at least. It's just dumb. Well, there's a kill. And I'm dead.
We are losing objective Butter.
Oh wow, a lot of players there.
We have lost objective Butter.
It could have been them. They are rushing their enemies.
We have lost the sector.
Seems like someone in the chat. I'm reading the chat, so you guys can comment. It's the same guy with the binoculars. Well, anyways, how are you guys doing today?
The enemy has reached the final objective.
Yeah, we have to hold this. There's no other way. There's so many grenades though.
We are losing objective Apples.
Okay, no, something has to be wrong. I was sure I hit him directly in the chest. That should have been.
lost the battle, but this terrible war is finally over. Too many of us have perished, too many injured, broken forever. We who are alive must tell the stories of our sacrifice, our struggle, so that such horrors never happen again.
The success of the Meuse-Argonne offensive came at a high price, and remains to this date the bloodiest battle in American history. This outcome broke the German army, leading to an armistice and peace, with the Allies' nation dictating terms.
This game is so stupid sometimes. I'll just keep using the assault class for the next few minutes, I guess. I mean, few hours. I'm not sure how long I'll stay live though. But hey, whatever. We'll just win the next one. We got this.
Men, we have cut this far into our enemy's belly. We must continue to plunge the knife deeper. First, we must wrest Caudry village from the British. From there, we shall advance upon and ford Selle River. Once across, it'll be a battle for the airship crash site to secure advantage in the area. Finally, and swiftly, we will conquer Le Cateau Station. Ready yourselves. Let's see, hopefully this map is actually full.
Heute Morgen sah ich einen Adler über dem Berg kreisen. Ich kam nicht umhin, an unseren Reichsadler zu denken, der uns die wahre Größe unserer Ideale zeigt. So majestätisch, so erhaben. Er kann von dort oben sicher die Italiener sehen.
This
Wie dieser Raubvogel werde ich sie mir holen. Einen nach dem anderen.
Soldaten.
Fall back to our second line in the Valley of Seren. Should we lose the pass, do not...
It's another empty match. This game is really good, to be honest. Let's see. Maybe the server browser had stuff. Hopefully this is good. Oh well, we are actually in a match where there's other people. Who would have guessed? Anyways, this should be pretty good.
Ich sehe ein Flugzeug!
Hopefully someone on the AA gun shoots the planes down.
We have taken objective Edward. We have taken objective Charlie.
Feindliches Flugzeug, Jungs!
We have taken objective Duff.
Ash. But hey, I did some damage on my ghost. Maybe a machine gun would be better in this case. Oh, we can get in here spawn as well.
Flugzeug gesichtet!
This is pretty calm. Just up this guy, not really doing much, trying to stay alive.
Flugzeug in Sichtweite! Feindflugzeug! Aufpassen! Flugzeug da oben!
Only bad thing being it's all of it. Hey, this guy is turning towards him.
Feindflugzeug da oben!
Oh no. He's behind this now. I can't shoot. And I don't know what the gunner is doing. Hopefully that guy moves.
We have taken objective butter.
Imagine if that gets a kill. You just can't shoot a lot from this place.
Feindliches Flugzeug! Feindliches Flugzeug gesichtet!
I think that's a fair bit of damage. Hopefully I get the kill. But
Panzer gesichtet!
looking at this, the fact that we're back or up or down that much, I'm not sure about it. May just be. That was pretty stupid. But hey, at least I distracted the tank. That would have worked way better if I had this. Let's actually try. Let's actually try to kill the tank. Like this. I don't think that's really bad at all. Yeah. It absolutely meant the plane we were using.
We have lost objective butter.
Wir haben eines unserer Ziele besetzt, Jungs.
The enemy controls all objectives.
Wir haben alle die
We have taken objective Edward.
Das Ziel ist unter Kontrolle! Seht zu, dass es so bleibt!
We have taken objective Duff.
Erobert hätten wir das Ziel. Jetzt müssen wir es nur noch halten.
I didn't notice if that guy got killed or not. I have no idea.
Da drüben ist ein Sanitäter.
That guy got the guy behind us. Ah. Give you a shot again.
We have lost objective Edward.
Can't really use a shotgun if that happens. I was in a trench. How did that kill me?
We are losing objective Duff.
That makes no sense. How?
We have lost objective Duff. We have a behemoth en route. Our behemoth has arrived. Halfway there, the enemy has the upper hand.
Shit.
Feindlicher Kavallerist in Sichtweite.
The trench raider kit is available near your location.
I got ganged up. I feel like I probably could have gotten the kill if I had the shotgun.
We have taken objective Edward.
How does that make sense?
Keine Sorge, das kann ich verhandeln.
We have lost objective apples.
How does that only do 19 damage to the lungs? This is pretty sad.
We have taken objective Charlie. We are losing objective Charlie. We have taken objective Duff. We have lost objective Charlie.
How did that do 87 damage? That doesn't even make sense. This guy does like 38 and that's just
objective apples. We have lost objective apples.
does not make sense.
We have lost objective Duff. We have taken objective apples. We are losing objective apples.
I guess we can. Yeah, we'll see. I guess we can just let's go and react to stuff. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's react.
Yeah. 张牙舞爪健身操，祝您健康步步高，乐的。
代表，首先，我认为，在人类抗击新冠肺炎疫情的关键时刻，举行这次世卫大会，具有十分重要的意义。人类正在经历第二次世界大战结束以来，
大家好，中国，现在我有冰淇淋，我很喜欢冰淇淋，但是速度与激情中，冰淇淋，速度与激情，速度与激情中，我最喜欢。所以现在是因为是这样，准备1、2、3。
朋友是一个坚韧不拔的纪录片，在香港这座城市的设置。主演钱德勒、罗斯、吴波斯尼、瑞秋、莫妮卡和一些其他他妈的演员。
What the fuck did I just watch?
Oh my. What else can we watch? That's good content. Alright. Look at this. I found this yesterday.
All right, Major. I've landed. Great work, Snake. Commencing Operation Snake Eater. Understood. But first, let me get something to eat. Why isn't there any food in my bag? Well, we had to make room for your medicine, bandages, weapons. Okay, that's great. What the fuck am I supposed to eat? No, Snake, I'm not eating a fucking tree frog. This is what you were trained for. Why don't you eat a tree frog? No. I don't want to. Exactly. So you better be sending me some goddamn Lunchables. Snake, those won't be invented for like another 30 years. I'm fighting a giant gay man who shoots lightning out of his fingertips. A man who could talk to bees. And a furry. But Lunchables, that's where we draw the line. Fine. I'll get you your Lunchables. Bitches.
What other games can I play that would be entertaining for you guys to watch? I mean, I can stream Destiny here if you guys would be interested in that. Oh well. Oh right, Subnautica 2. That's a good game. We could probably play that and enjoy it. I mean, I'd probably get scared. But hey, it's content, good content. This seems really interesting.
Hello, and welcome to Lecture 1 of Ichthyology. Essentially what this is an online, free, publicly accessible class on ichthyology. It will be at the level, detail, and knowledge-wise of a full-on college course, but there's no keeping up, there's no homework. These lectures are just publicly available for you to watch. My name is Zachary. I am a fish biologist. I work primarily with diseases and parasites in aquaculture systems, mainly focused on Cyprinidae, which is something that we will look at when we learn the taxonomy of fishes. And I'm going to be teaching this ichthyology class because I am a firm believer that knowledge of fish is extremely underrated in current society and underrepresented. I think that we need more people who know what they're talking about when it comes to fish, because fish are a huge part of diets no matter where you go in the world, and they're a huge part of the ecosystems that we're trying to protect. So even just the most general knowledge can be absolutely essential in our world.
You know, yeah, I agree, because I've also seen a lot of people, especially in Asian parts, and I'm from Asia since I'm in India, and there's a lot of fish. There's not, compared to stuff like pork and beef, yeah, there's a lot more fish over here, I would say, from my experience at least.
So this first lecture, we're going to talk about what is a fish. This is an important place to start because it's not as simple as it might seem. When you think of a fish, you imagine, maybe these things that I have on screen here, this, salmon-looking thing, or this reef fish-looking thing, and yes, those are fish, but there are some diverse definitions of fish that you should be aware of so that you know what you're working with. So the first thing is, how do we define a fish? Let's talk about what I consider the 4 things that make a fish, okay? So the first thing is that they are cold-blooded, all right? Fish are cold-blooded. Cold-blooded, if you don't know, means that your temperature relies on the temperature of your environment. You are not capable of creating and pumping heat throughout your body. So if it's hot in the water, you are hot. If it's cold in the water, you are cold, okay? This can be an adaptation restriction for a lot of animals. Number 2, fish are vertebrates. They have vertebral columns which support their body. Basically think like a spine in us, though it's a little bit more complicated and diverse than that. That is the general idea. Number 3, fish live in and thrive via water, aka aquatic environments, whether it's freshwater, saltwater, or somewhere in between, which we call brackish water. Fish are aquatic by definition. And for fins and gills, fish will have gills that diffuse dissolved oxygen from the water into their blood, and they will have fins for locomotion, okay? And these are the general 4 rules that you can apply to determine whether something is a fish or not. Of course, all relationships are determined evolutionarily for the main part. So this is just convenient morphological traits that we can use to associate these things. It doesn't necessarily always apply, and you'll see that when we look at exceptions. For cold-blooded, there's the opa, which is a fully warm-blooded fish. Of course, not to the extent that, mammals are warm-blooded. And then there's lots of other fast-moving fish, such as tuna, which are actually able to circulate heat in their bodies. So they're not what you would call cold-blooded. They're not to the full...
Aren't great white sharks also warm-blooded? I'm not sure, but let's actually look it up. Oh, so they are warm-blooded. Yeah, I was correct.
Level of warm-blooded, but they don't fit that definition. As far as vertebrates, there's ancestral orders of fish that have things called notochords, which are basically just ancestral versions of vertebra. They're still technically vertebrates, but the definition you can see is a little bit broad. And then there are some fish, such as hagfish, which the actual presence of vertebra is debatable. So there are potentially some fish families or orders that don't have any vertebra. Number 3 for aquatic, we have mud skippers. Mud skippers spend 90% of their time on land, though I would say this is the most, the least strict exception because they are still aquatic based. They still need the water, thrive via the water. The water is their environment. They just spend most of their time out of the water, but they're still wet in that environment. But there are fish that are primarily not aquatic. And as far as fins and gills go, lungfish actually use lungs to breathe primarily. They're what's called facultative breathers. They can breathe with their lungs from the air, from the atmospheric oxygen, unlike just from the dissolved oxygen in the water when they need to. And then hagfish have no defined fins. So there are obviously notable exceptions no matter what you're looking at, and it's important to keep that in mind because not everything is going to be so easy as to fit your exact description, what you're thinking of when you think of a fish. You know, it's just, life can't be that easy, unfortunately. When we're talking about fish, we're talking about extremely, extremely old, hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Things are not going to be as simple as, you know, differences between human beings or other more recently evolved groups of animals. All right, so now let's talk about what isn't a fish, because you might be thinking, okay, so defining what exactly is a fish can be a little bit complicated, but it should be pretty easy to tell what isn't a fish, right? So let's look at humans, just as an easy example. If we go down the list, humans are vertebrates. Yeah, that's true, but they're not aquatic, we're not cold-blooded, and we don't have fins or gills. At least I don't last time I checked. Which you would think then that means we've checked off only one. And 3 of the 4 things that we listed as requirements for being a fish are X'd out, which means that this is not a fish, right, by those definitions that we've defined. But actually, if we look evolutionarily, all of the tetrapods, okay, evolved from ancient fish, okay? This isn't the best diagram, but it's not bad. All of the tetrapods, which you'll see up here, which are a lot of the animals that you see nowadays, like the reptiles, amphibians, the mammals, the birds, all came from some of the first fish to walk on land. You might recognize the tiktaalik here, the first fish to walk on land, okay? And those tetrapods are the common ancestor between, like I said, birds, lizards, mammals, which includes human beings. So evolutionarily, humans come from fish. In fact, lizards, birds, amphibians, all mammals come from fish. And so by a taxonomical definition, they are technically fish. And so you can go tell your friends that you are a fish. And you're right. Taxonomically, you are a fish. But that's not a really great way to define something. Because if we go by that logic, then almost everything that we can observe in our world outside of, you know, fauna or outside of flora is going to be a fish. So taxonomically, yes, all of the tetrapods are fish. Amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, even us human beings are fish. But the way that we use the word fish now, and the way that we're going to be using it in this class, is just a convenient way of saying in between the lancelets and the tetrapods, okay? The things that would evolve into fish, which we will talk about next lecture when we talk about taxonomy, all the way up to the tetrapods, the very end of what you would define as a fish, and you start defining them as other things like reptiles, amphibians. So while yes, technically all of the tetrapods are fish, it really doesn't make sense to define them that way. So the group that we call fish actually has a beginning and an ending point, which is not typical when you talk about taxonomy of animals. Like if you talk about the taxonomy of reptiles, you're talking about the most ancestral reptile and all of the reptiles that came from that. When you talk about birds, you're talking about the most ancestral bird and all the birds that came from that. When you talk about fish, you are talking about the most ancestral fish, yes, but you're not talking about all of the descendants that came from that, because some of those descendants are so morphologically distinct nowadays, you know, in the modern environment, that it's not even worth referring to them as fish anymore. It's still worth knowing the evolutionary relationship, which is why I mention it, but it shouldn't be something that you keep in mind so much. All right. So for the end of this lecture, this is just going to be an easy first introduction lecture to fish. I'm just going to talk about the diversity of fishes in general, because I think it's important to just see what's out there because there's some pretty cool stuff. And I'm not going to mention a ton of stuff. Next episode, we're actually going to go through, I said next episode, next lecture, we're actually going to go through the whole taxonomy of all living fish and some extinct fish for that matter as well. So you'll actually know the whole breakdown of how fish evolved, where they came from, how they got to where they are now, and everything in between. But for now, we're just going to look at some of the cool diversity that, you know, sprouted along the way. So the first thing we'll go is a coelacanth. It's actually my favorite fish. They have lobe fins, which resemble tetrapod limbs more than typical fish fins. So those first animals to walk on land, the coelacanth here, which is still alive, by the way, there are still living coelacanths. Its fins resemble those animals that would eventually walk on land more than it does, you know, regular bony fish fins. They were thought to be extinct. Everyone's heard this story. Then around 100 years ago, some living specimens were found from the Indian Ocean. They weren't actually extinct, and the human race as a whole didn't think they were extinct, actually. There were lots of local fishermen who knew what they were, but they just wouldn't bring them in. They'd throw them over because they're really bad eating. They're really ancestral. They've got the notochord. They've got not really meaty flesh, these lobe fins. They're not really useful to humans in any way, so fishermen would catch them, throw them overboard, and thus they were never really tracked until eventually one was brought back to a market for whatever reason. Scientists happened to observe it, noticed the connection between some fossils that they had seen and this animal, and found out that there are actually 2 living species of coelacanths still alive.
That's actually really interesting, since, as he said, I'm pretty sure these are cave-dwelling fish. So what if there are other cave-dwelling fishes deep under the water? I mean, we already have mapped a lot of these places, but still, this wasn't discovered. I mean, this was pretty recent, so there may be more, and there may be like more interesting ones as well. Who knows?
Most of them are now extinct. They have notochords, which we will talk about. I'm going to say the word notochord a lot because it is somewhat important. Basically, what you need to know for now is it's like a developmental version of the spine. It's basically what most animals have as they grow into getting a spine, you know, the vertebral column that we associate with a vertebra. But they have it their entire lives. And a lot of these ancestral fish will have these notochords their entire lives because it's a precursor to actual vertebra. So when we get to anatomy, we'll talk about notochords a little bit more. But for now, just understand that it is like a more primal version of a spinal cord. The Dunkleosteus, you know, I couldn't leave out all of the extinct fish in this. There are a lot of very cool extinct fish, and I thought it was important to talk about some of the cool ones so that people got to know them, because I really like extinct fish and talking about extinct fish, but they're not brought up much in ichthyology. I guess because the main uses of ichthyology is talking about things as they are in the modern day, how we can manage fisheries, stuff like that. So when we talk about these extinct fish, it almost seems like we're kind of wasting our time because we can't really manage anything. But you can always learn from the past. I think it's important to have that knowledge under your belt. So the Dunkleosteus didn't actually have teeth, despite what you're seeing here. Its jaw extended into plates. So it basically had an elongated jaw with plate-like teeth that it could use to chomp down. They actually got decent sized. The largest one, which is Dunkleosteus terrelli, reached nearly 30 feet long, which is hard to conceptualize, but is really big, close to some of the biggest sharks. And it had a bite force up to...
I was gonna say that 30 meters sounds like it would be bigger than most of the great whites and Greenland sharks we have seen.
750 kilograms at the tips of these blade-like teeth. So not only are they not teeth, you know, they don't have that like breakaway ability that you think about when you think about teeth. They're actually, you know, these sharp plates built into the jaw, and they have that insane bite force. So the Dunkleosteus was definitely a creature to be reckoned with, and an interesting one that a lot of people associate with. And a lot of people who like paleontology will talk about this as like the extinct fish that you pay attention to. This, and I'd say maybe Leedsichthys. Another one is the lungfish. So lungfish have these weird, you'll see them here, long filamentous fins. Fins is, we'll call them fins. It's a little complicated.
Those look like... These remind me of eels, but these things kind of look like legs, but like really old and ancestral, prehistoric legs. Maybe the first legs. Maybe these were what evolved into legs.
Super interesting development they've got there. They can actually breathe atmospheric oxygen, like I had mentioned earlier. So again, we'll talk about when we get to respiration and internal anatomy. But basically, gills allow fish to take oxygen out of water and put it into their blood, right? And in humans, the way that we breathe is we take oxygen out of the air and put it into our blood. Lungs do that, right? So you have specialized structures depending on what you're doing. Gills if you're trying to take oxygen out of water, and lungs if you're trying to take oxygen out of atmospheric air. Well, these guys actually have both, which is pretty awesome. So they have these gills and these gill slits, but they also have these lungs. So they're actually able to choose in oxygen-rich environments to stay under the water and breathe dissolved oxygen from the water, or in oxygen-poor environments, they are able to go up to the surface, gulp air, and actually get oxygen out of that. And they do this amazing thing where they'll dig themselves into riverbeds and go into a hibernation-type state, and they can live in that state for around a year in a completely dry riverbed. So basically, they'll inhabit a river, they'll dig themselves into the riverbed, you know, below the dirt in the river. Okay, the river will dry up, as rivers do. Sometimes rivers are not there all year long, especially, you know, around the equator and below. Rivers are not there all year long. They dry up and come back, and sometimes it's not even a one-year thing, sometimes, or a seasonal thing, you know. Sometimes they're gone for a full year and they come back the next year. It can depend on a lot of factors. The lungfish basically can dig itself into the mud. This is a fish. This is an actual fish. And go into a hibernation completely dry. No, you know, the riverbed has nothing in it. To the, you know, average person, it's a completely dry riverbed. Unless you've seen my video on them, you've never actually heard about, because they don't get more than a foot in length. You know, a foot is pretty much like their maximum that we could imagine one reaching. But yet they have the largest biomass of any vertebrate. So if you don't know, biomass is basically the amount of weight of organism that exists out there. So when you think about, you know, the weight of organisms, if you think about something like the whale shark, you know, the largest fish, you got to imagine one whale shark weighs enough for like 10,000 of these little under a foot things, probably more than that, honestly. And yet, this species alone has more biomass than any other vertebrate. It's absolutely insane. They're actually so abundant that when we used to use sonars, the Navy used to use sonars to try and map out the ocean floor or look for submarines, things like that, the sonars would actually reflect off of them because there was such a thick layer of these lanternfish in the ocean. And on the sonar, that looks like a sea floor. So the way that sonars work is they send out a signal. The signal bounces back off of the solid objects, which is usually the bottom of the ocean. And then that signal, how long it takes to get back, will tell the ship, you know, the sonar, how far the signal had to travel. And then basically you can map out as it goes along, you know, the depth and the height and how long it took to go down. But what was happening was they were actually mapping out a false seafloor. So the actual seafloor was way down here, but the sonar's bouncing off of like here and coming back up because of this thick population of lanternfish. And another interesting thing is that they, on their own, absorb more carbon dioxide than the entire Amazon rainforest. So these guys are more important than you realize, even if you've never heard of them. They're extremely important to our ecosystems and absolutely need to be protected. Right now, luckily, there's not many. I believe there's one, maybe two commercial fisheries, meaning wild capture fisheries that deal with these guys. But they're not super useful to us, at least not yet. We're not desperate enough to start going after lanternfish. So for now, they're safe. But who knows how the future will develop as populations dwindle and we become more desperate. Another interesting one is the hagfish. This is the guy that I talked about earlier. He was a part of a bunch of the exceptions. They have a skull. They have the bare minimum. But they debatably don't have a vertebral column. It's pretty interesting how this works. When we get into taxonomy, we'll talk about why they don't have a vertebral column, even though they're fish. You know, they're in the vertebrate clade. So it doesn't. It's a little bit confusing to be like, okay, well, they're vertebrates, but they don't have a vertebra. How does that work? And that's, you know, something called derived characters. It's these traits that exist in taxa that don't exist in their ancestors. And we'll talk about that when we get to taxonomy, which is next lecture.
These fish look absolutely disgusting. Like, I've seen them and they produce some kind of a slime. So nasty, and somehow they got onto roads and it made the entire road unusable.
They don't really have true fins, and they likely evolved backwards. Just I'm talking about that derived characteristics. So their ancestors would have had vertebra, and they evolved to actually lose those vertebra. So unlike what you would expect, these would be, you know, ancestral to the vertebrates, that these would have evolved into vertebrates. These have actually evolved from vertebrates, most likely. Of course, that's not necessarily proven yet. So there's always the potential that it's proven that these are ancestral to vertebrates, and, you know, I'm full of crap. And they actually create a slime, this thin, extremely durable and sticky slime when they're stressed. So, you know, if you try to grab one in a tank or something like that, there's plenty of videos of it on the internet. It can be and is currently attempting to be used to create bulletproof vests, which is pretty amazing. It's the main issue is getting that abundance of slime is extremely difficult. It's really hard to mass produce it on hagfish to make them produce more to the point where we can create products with it and have some kind of, you know, economic benefit from it. But the slime is really interesting. It's a really interesting natural product that at the very least we'd like to emulate, if not farm ourselves. And then finally, we've got the whale shark. Can't not talk about some of the big boys. This is the largest living fish, yet it is a filter feeder. It is not a predator. And that's actually a trend throughout the history of fish, that some of the largest fish in existence, these large bony fish, are all filter feeders. The bonarichthyes, the leadsichthyes, the whale shark. There are obviously, you know, Megalodon, Dunkleosteus. There are large predators that existed at one point or another. But some of these largest fish are able to sustain themselves as filter feeders, which I think is really interesting and shows this niche that has existed for, you know, hundreds of millions of years. They actually, the spot patterns you'll notice on the back of the whale shark is so unique to the individual. It's basically a fingerprint. And the actual technology that we can use to identify individual whale sharks, so say you come across a whale shark and you name it and you want to identify it again, there's a software created by NASA which was used to map and identify stars in the sky, is actually being used to identify individual whale sharks. It's a fact I learned from my friend Shark Bites, and it's a pretty awesome fact to have NASA technology adapted to identify these guys. They're curious, they're intelligent, and they're crazy docile. Doesn't mean you should be approaching one, because in general you just shouldn't be messing with nature when you don't need to. You shouldn't be interfering. But were you to, they are friendly and they are kind and they are actually extremely intelligent, as a lot of things get more intelligent with size. So that's going to be the end of lecture 1. Just want to give you an introduction.
I actually really like whale sharks. I mean, they just seem so cool. True, they don't like kill a lot because they're filter feeders. I mean, they're not cool in the sense that they do a lot of crazy stuff, but still, they look really nice. Anyways, I guess that's it for me for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I did. It was pretty nice. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully we will start making live streams pretty much every day. And hopefully you guys can come too. And we'll be able to do a